Fellas, we're going to be going through every single UFC weight class and ranking every weight class by how hard it is or how easy it is to get ranked. So there'll be some divisions that you'll notice are pretty easy to get ranked. You just need a couple of good wins and a bit of hype and you've made it. And then there's other divisions where you need to go through a lot, even just get a shot at the rankings. You need to beat so many good unranked fighters to get ranked. So we're going to be ranking each UFC weight class and we'll start off at number 8 with the heavyweight division. Heavyweight's kind of known for being one of the most uncompetitive divisions in the UFC, but the way we're going to be ranking this is in 3 different categories. How good are the ranked fighters? So when you look at the rankings, is the rankings jam-packed full of good and talented fighters, or is there only a couple of them and then the rest are kind of cans? How many unranked monsters or killers are there? So if you go outside the rankings, is it full of fighters that are talented, but they've still not been able to make it into the rankings, which shows how good the division is? And have they got a stacked roster? So have they got a lot of good fighters at the end, but then you look at the lower rankings and it's full with a bunch of cans? Is it a very top heavy division, or is it actually a stacked roster full of talent? And we'll start off with the heavyweight division and how good are the ranked fighters in the heavyweight division. Now, if we take a look at the heavyweight rankings right now, there's not a lot of fighters in the rankings that I would consider really good right now. There's only a couple of them, and I think these fighters that I've categorized as good, I think these are going to be the guys that are at the top of the heavyweight division for the next 5 to 10 years. Obviously, there's going to be a few retirements on the way as well, but at the moment, I see these guys dominating. These guys seem to be way more talented than everyone else. They seem to be, basically just a lot quicker, a lot better, a lot more athletic is another one as well, and just a lot more talented than everyone else. I mean, they might have had a couple of losses due to getting hit in the heavyweight division by a big shot, but as far as how well-rounded they are and as far as talent goes, I think these guys are going to be at the top of the heavyweight division for, the many years to come. And then I've highlighted Jones and Stipe in yellow. You're probably thinking that it was kind of unfair to not put Jones and Stipe on that list, but John Jones looked terrible against Cyril Gane. I know we got the finish, but it was facing an easy stylistic matchup, and he didn't look good in that fight. He looked really slow and stiff. And Stipe Miocic, I don't really need to explain it. The dude's been out for, 3-4 years, and he got KO'd out stiff in his last fight, so I've given them a yellow. They're still decent. I'm not going to completely call them terrible, but I can't really categorize them as one of the best. And then the rest of the heavyweight division is kind of just a complete mess. It's kind of just like you've been fed slop on a plate. I mean, most of the ranked heavyweights that I haven't just mentioned are these lay-and-pray grapplers that kind of just rely on their weight to take people down. The other guys are, these powerhouses that don't really have much talent but have a lot of power to make up for it. And then you've kind of just got Marcin Tybura, who's a combination of all of them. So the rest of the heavyweight rankings, it's not that impressive at all. And it's not even just that. There are some heavyweight ranked fighters that I'm really confused how they're even ranked. Like Rodrigo Nascimento. Look at this dude's record and look at how he's been able to get ranked in the top 15. His best win is Dontel Mayers twice. He's been given Dontel Mayers twice and beaten him, and those are his best wins. And he's been able to get ranked in the heavyweight division despite losing a couple of times as well. And then you've got Tati Wiforza. This dude's on a 5-fight losing streak, 4 of them coming by way of finish. Like, if any other division, you're on like a 2-3 fight losing streak, you're getting kicked out. So that just kind of shows the state of the heavyweight division. And the ranked fighters, I'm giving them a 3 out of 10. They have got the worst ranked fighters in the UFC. Now, how many unranked monsters or killers do they have? We take a look at the best unranked heavyweights. There's a couple of good unranked heavyweights: Mick Parkin, Waldo Cortez Acosta, Dinis, Shamil Gaziev, but it's not like these guys are again amazing. I mean, Waldo Cortez Acosta got beaten by Marcos Regueiro de Lima, Shamil Gaziev got humiliated by Rosenstrike, and it's not even like they're these big, massive, upcoming prospects. They kind of just fit in with the rest of the heavyweights that I said were kind of bad before. They might be able to make it into the rankings from top 10 to top 15, but they're unathletic, they're not talented, they kind of just have enough going for them. So, how good are the unranked fighters? I'm giving them a 4 out of 10. Not much unranked talent in the heavyweight division. And then how stacked is the roster? So, if we take a look at the heavyweight roster, I've kind of split it into 4 divisions. The first division, at the top division, is kind of like the top heavyweights in the world. The most talented heavyweights in the world. The ones that make the heavyweight division actually watchable in 2024. The ones that seem to go out there and get it done every time. The second division is kind of like top contenders in the heavyweight division. Maybe not title contenders at the minute. Maybe not the cream of the crop in the heavyweight division, but they're still, amongst some of the best in the division, still kind of, in the contendership. And then we've got the third layer of the heavyweight division, which is guys who are good enough to make it into the rankings. They might have better athleticism, they might be a little bit more well-rounded, they're able to make it into the rankings. And then the final layer, which is kind of just like the unranked sector of the heavyweight division. So the unranked heavyweights that, are good enough to make it close to the rankings, but just haven't been able to make it into the rankings. And if we look at the heavyweight division as a whole, both as an unranked factor and a ranked factor, how stacked is the heavyweight division? There's about 5 fighters that I get excited to see in the heavyweight division. It isn't that stacked. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10, which brings the average to the heavyweight division a 4 out of 10 in difficulty of breaking it to the rankings. And then the light heavyweight division, We take a look at the light heavyweight division. You know, there's some good names in the light heavyweight division. Obviously, we've got a light heavyweight title fight tomorrow. How good are the ranked fighters in the light heavyweight division? If we look at the light heavyweight division, I think there's quite a lot of good ranked fighters in the heavyweight division, at least compared to the heavyweight division anyway. There is a lot of good talent in the light heavyweight division, a lot of guys that seem to be very skilled in whatever discipline they go for, a lot of guys that seem to be able to beat the rest of the contenders, and just a lot of guys that have displayed a lot of skill, and you're not worried, you're not confused how they've made it into the rankings. And then I've also got a couple of fighters that I've put in the bad sector of the light heavyweight division. Two of them being Johnny Walker and Dominic Reyes, guys who have zero chin, guys who have taken multiple losses recently. I know Reyes is coming off a win, but they have taken multiple losses recently that don't really look good to be ranked. And I've also got Anthony Smith and Alonzo Menifield. Smith has to be probably one of the worst ranked fighters in the UFC right now, and Alonzo Menifield's just had 2 back-to-back finishes, and he has terrible fight IQ. So the light heavyweight division isn't looking amazing, and it's not even just that. Anthony Smith, like I just said, this dude, he's lost 4 out of his last 6. Lost 4 out of his last 6. One of these wins being a split decision over Ryan Spann, someone who he'd already beaten before. And this dude's ranked number 12 in the division. And Dominic Reyes as well. I know he had a very close fight with John Jones, but even after that loss to Jones, he went on a 3-fight losing streak, all by finish. And he's managed to get a win over Dustin Jacoby. And even before his Jacoby win, he was ranked. So how good are the ranked fighters? I'm giving them a 6 out of 10. Are there any unranked killers or monsters? I mean, you've got Vitor Petrino, Umar Sy, and Ian Q. Talaba. Vitor Petrino's already lost to Anthony Smith, and Ian Q. Talaba's lost way more fights than he's won in the UFC. There's just not many unranked prospects in the light heavyweight division. I feel like that's the one division where there's not really any big unranked fighters to look out for. So I'm giving them a 4 for that. Have they got a stacked roster? I mean, like I said, if we look at it and categorize it into the layers, after you get past the second and the third layer, it's not really that difficult. Like if you beat Dustin Jacoby and then go and beat Johnny Walker, you've probably made it into the top 10 of the light heavyweight division, which isn't really saying much. So it's not got the most stacked roster. I'll give them a 6 out of 10 though. So the average for the light heavyweight division difficulty is a 5 out of 10 difficulty in getting ranked. It's not extremely hard. It's not extremely easy. It's a 5. And then the middleweight division, the middleweight rankings, there's a lot of new talent in the middleweight rankings in comparison to the past couple of years. And I feel like it's a division that has definitely developed in the past few years as well. Now, how good are the ranked fighters in the middleweight division? Well, if we do the same thing, there's quite a few good ranked fighters in the middleweight division. I think there's some good ranked fighters from 10 to 15, and I think it's a very top-heavy division where you go from 8 and pretty much every single fighter is good. You know, you've got the guys that have been around in the middleweight division for a while, like Adesanya, Whitaker, and, kind of the OGs of the middleweight division. And you've got these guys that are on the come-up, guys like Michel Pereira, Hernandez, Imavov, who are pretty new to the middleweight division but have taken over with the talent that they've got. So they've definitely got some good talent, but there's also some talent that I've put yellow. You know, they're decent, they're not bad, but they're not amazing. And I've done Paulo Costa, Roman Dolidze, Hermansson, and Curtis. Costa's lost to pretty much every top contender he's fought, and his best wins are Yoel Romero and Luke Rockhold, 2 guys that ain't in the UFC anymore. Dolidze's been beaten by Vettori and Imavov, so I can't really call him one of the best. Hermansson's lost to Strickland, Vettori, Cannonier, and Dolidze, a couple of those coming by way of finish. And Curtis, the dude's best wins is a knockout over Brendan Allen ages ago, who he's now lost to, a Jack Hermansson win, and a Kelvin Gastelum win as well. And again, if we look at the middleweight division, I mean, Chris Curtis being ranked, I think, is the kind of thing that lets it down. I mean, the dude, look at his recent fights. This dude's not been performing really well recently. I mean, he's had a win over Marc-Andre Barriault and Joaquin Buckley in the past couple of years, and he's managed to get ranked in the middleweight division. So how good are the ranked fighters? I'll give them a 7. How many unranked monsters are there? Middleweight might have some of the most unranked monsters out there. Gregory Rodriguez, Joe Pyfer, Sharapouti Magomedov, Bo Nickel, Bruno Ferreira, Ikram Aliskerov, Roman Kopylov, Christian Leroy Duncan. Middleweight probably has some of the most unranked talent in the entirety of the UFC. There are so many prospects in the middleweight division. I've got to give them a 7 out of 10. There's a lot of unranked prospects. It's not like there's just 1 or 2 names. It's full with unranked talent. So I'm giving them a 7 out of 10. And is it a stacked roster? There's a lot of good names in the middleweight division as well. Like, again, if you look at the layers, there's a lot of good fighters that are unranked. There's a couple of fighters that might not be amazing in the rankings, but from start to finish, it has got a pretty, stacked roster. So I'll give them a 6 out of 10 for the stacked roster, bringing the average for the middleweight division to 7 out of 10 in difficulty to get ranked. And then the welterweight division. Welterweight division, a division that again has kind of had its ups and its downs. We're currently going through the downs phase, but you go to the same the category. How good are the ranked fighters? If we look at the welterweight division, a lot of good ranked fighters. Again, it does tend to be kind of top heavy where you go from 12 onwards. There's, a lot of good ranked fighters, but it is pretty much filled with fighters that are good, fighters that are talented, and there's a lot of different talents. There's a lot of strikers in the welterweight division as well as a lot of grapplers. There's completely different martial arts. Like, you look at the light heavyweight division, it's just full of strikers. Welterweight is very diverse in the kind of martial arts and the styles that they have, which is good. And I've got 3 fighters that I've kind of put in that decent shade. I've got MVP, Luque, and Holland. MVP, he is pretty one-dimensional. He got a good win over Holland, but he kind of got exposed with his grappling against Ian Gary. And even though I want to say good things about MVP, he is one-dimensional. Luque has been on a bit of a downward streak recently. He seems to be getting a bit washed. I mean, when you're getting matched up against Nick Diaz in 2024, it basically tells everything you need to know. And Kevin Holland, the dude's ranked 4-4 in the welterweight division in the UFC. He's a lot better in the middleweight division, so how good are the ranked fighters? I'll give them a 7 out of 10. A lot of good ranked fighters in the welterweight division. It's not a division that's kind of got a lot of cans in. It is a very competitive division in the UFC. How many unranked monsters or killers are there? There's a lot. Randy Brown, Rinat Fakhretdinov, Carlos Prates, Brian Battle, Ruzi Boyev, Nicholas Dalby. Similar to the middleweight division, the welterweight division has a lot of good unranked talent, and I think we're going to see a lot of these guys on the rise in these next couple of months, especially guys like Brian Battle and Carlos Prates, who seem to be having amazing performances after another. So how many unranked monsters or killers did they have? I'm giving them a 6 out of 10. Maybe not as filled as the middleweight division, but in comparison to other divisions, they've got a lot of unranked talent. And have they got a stacked roster? I would say they do. Again, if we categorize it into the 4 different layers, they've got a very stacked roster. A lot of good unranked fighters, even from the 10 to 15 range, there's a lot of good fighters. So they definitely have a really stacked roster. So I'm going to give them a 7 out of 10. It's a stacked division, it's the welterweight division. A lot of good talent no matter where you look. And I think that gives the average for the welterweight division a 7 out of 10. And then the lightweight division, arguably the most competitive division in the UFC. How many good ranked fighters are there in the lightweight division? There's a lot of good ranked fighters. Again, like I said before, it's argued that it's the most competitive division in the UFC. Some people think lightweight has the best fighters on planet Earth. They've got the most talent, they've got the most skill, they're the most well-rounded. So they've definitely got some good ranked lightweight fighters, and I've put some in that yellow category. Benoit St. Denis, Jalin Turner, Pimlet, and Dos Santos. BSD's best when he's Matt Frivola, and he's on a two-fight losing streak, both by way of finish. So he hasn't really impressed me massively so far in the rankings. Jalin Turner's dangerous, but again, I mean, the dude lost to Dan Hooker. The dude just got finished by Moicano, one of the craziest upsets, and he's just not consistent enough. Pimlet, he's not lost, but he has had a couple of dodgy wins in the UFC, and he still needs to prove me against one more ranked fighter. And Dos Santos is similar to guys like Luque, on a bit of a downward streak in the lightweight division. Obviously, Luque's at welterweight, but it's on a bit of a downward streak in the lightweight division. So how good are the ranked fighters? I'll give them an 8 out of 10 just because of how competitive the ranked fighters are. How many unranked monsters or killers are there? I mean, you've got a lot. Fares Ziam, Yoel Alvarez, Mitibek Orba, Diego Ferreira, Ludwig Klein. There's so many. Grant Dawson as well, even Bobby Green. The lightweight division, again, similar to the middleweight division, has some of the best unranked fighters in the entirety of the UFC. I mean, look at the guys like Yoel Alvarez. In any other division, Yoel Alvarez would be ranked. You know what I mean? Mitibek Orba, this guy's on the rise as well. Diego Ferreira. There's just so much unranked talent in the lightweight division. So I'm going to give them a whopping 8 out of 10 for unranked talent. I think even in the unranked sector of the lightweight division, it's full of straight murderers and well-rounded killers. So I'm giving them an 8 out of 10. Do they have a stacked roster? Yes, they do. The lightweight division has to be one of the most stacked divisions in the UFC. It could be unranked fighters. It could be the top 10 to top 15 range. It could be the title talks. There are good fighters everywhere. I'm giving them an 8 out of 10, which obviously brings the average for the lightweight division in difficulty to an 8 out of 10. And then the featherweight division, you look at the featherweight division, a lot of good fighters on the rise in the featherweight division. How good are the ranked fighters in the division? Well, we'll do the same category. There is a lot of good ranked fighters in the featherweight division, from the 15 to the champion range. It's, not really top heavy in this division. No matter where you look, there will be some good fighters, some fighters that are well-rounded, some fighters that are talented in their own rights. And again, there are just so many killers in this division. But I have got a few that I've put in that yellow range. I've got Dan Ige, Calvin Kattar, Giga Chikadze, Edson Barboza, and Bryce Mitchell. Now, the reason I've decided to choose these fighters is, I mean, Calvin Kattar, the dude is he's lost a lot of his recent fights. He seems to be slowing down in performances. He's kind of been looking bad against all these fighters. I can't really call him a top contender anymore. Dan Ige, he's a fun fighter. He's a BMF, but again, similar to Calvin Kattar, it seems like he loses a lot more than he wins. Giga Chikadze, I mean, his past 3 fights, he hasn't impressed me. He got butchered by Calvin Kattar, beaten by Arnold Allen, and he got a really close win over Alex Caceres. Bryce Mitchell's on a 2-fight that's not on a 2-fight losing streak, but he got beaten by Ilia Topuria viciously, and then viciously knocked out by Josh Emmett as well. And then Edson Barboza, the dude's at the end of his career, just got butchered by Lerone Murphy. So how good are the ranked fighters? I'll give them a 7 out of 10. Definitely some talented ranked fighters, especially at the top end of the division where there's guys like Volk, Holloway, and Topuria. But I'll give them a 7 out of 10. How many unranked monsters or killers are there? I mean, recently at UFC Paris, we got to see William Gomez. I mean, Felipe Lima's another one as well. Yoanderson Brito, Nathaniel Wood, Gene Silver as well. Gene Silver from the Fighting Nerds. I'll give them a 7 out of 10 for unranked fighters. A lot of good unranked talent in the featherweight division. And you look at, another category, is it a stacked roster? I'd say, yeah, it is a stacked roster in the featherweight division. No matter where you look as well, there is a lot of good talent. Whether you're looking in the unranked sector or whether you're looking in the rankings, there's a lot of good talent. I'm giving them an 8 out of 10 for a stacked roster, which brings the average for the featherweight division to a 7 out of 10. And then the bantamweight division. You look at the bantamweight rankings, the same category again, argued as arguably one of the biggest, one of the most competitive divisions in the UFC. How many good fighters are in the bantamweight division? There's so many. Bantamweight is literally filled and jam-packed with good fighters in the rankings. There's just so much good fighters. You need to be one of the best fighters in the world in the bantamweight division to even make it into the rankings. No matter where you look, there's just so much talent. And I will say, I think they are the most competitive division in the UFC, and the rankings really display that. And unfortunately, I've had to put Rob Font in that yellow category. I've got nothing against Rob Font. I just think he just hasn't been looking amazing recently. Losing to Figueiredo, losing to Vera viciously as well, losing to Sandhagen, losing to Jose Aldo. I know he's a good boxer and he recently fraud-checked, Adrian Yanez, but apart from that, he's not really made any big moves in the rankings. So he's the only yellow fighter, but how many good ranked fighters? I'm giving them a whopping 9 out of 10. I think the bantamweight division in the UFC has the best ranked fighters than any other division. I'm giving them a massive 9 out of 10 for that. How many unranked monsters or killers do they have? They've got a lot. Peyton Talbot, Said Nurmagomedov, Davy Grant as well. Vinicius Oliveira, Farid Basharat, Taylor Lapillus, who recently competed at UFC Paris. I'm giving them a 7 out of 10. There's a lot of unranked monsters and killers in the bantamweight division. Similar to a division like the lightweight division, it's not like when you leave the rankings that the talent goes out the window. There's so much talent unranked in the bantamweight division, which just makes the division so much competitive. And isn't it a stacked roster? I mean, just look at the division. Look, like I said before, whether you're in the rankings, whether you're unranked, it is a stacked division full of talent no matter where you look. So I'm giving them a massive 8 out of 10 for being a stacked roster. They do have a stacked roster, which brings the bantamweight division to an 8 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. Definitely one of the most competitive in the UFC. And then the flyweight division. Look at the rankings in the flyweight division. Kind of one of the most disrespected divisions in the UFC, but we're not talking about it from an entertainment perspective. We're talking about it from a difficulty perspective. So if we break down the rankings, again, there's just so much good talent in the flyweight division, specifically the top end. There are a few fighters that kind of ruin it, but again, there's just so much good fighters, so many fast fighters in this division. So again, you've got to be so up to your game. You've got to be so quick to even compete in the lightweight division. In the flyweight division, there's just a lot of good fighters. So I've categorized a lot of them as green. There's a few that have made the yellow as well, and the yellow is Tim Elliott, Tagir Lembekov, Cody Durden, and Matt Schnell. I mean, you look at Tim Elliott, listen, I think he's definitely deserved his ranking spot. I'm not saying it's crazy how he's unranked, but again, it seems like every good fighter he faces, he kind of loses to. Tagir Lembekov, the dude, I mean, he got beaten by Tim Elliott, and the dude can't even make weight in the flyweight division. Cody Durden, again, similar to Tim Elliott, he's not really been able to beat any major fighters in the flyweight division, and every good fighter that he's faced, he's lost to. And then Matt Schnell has to be one of the most chinny fighters in the flyweight division. The fact that this dude's still ranked is kind of crazy. So how good are the ranked fighters? I'll give them an 8 out of 10. I think there's a lot of good ranked fighters in this division. I mean, just guys like Pantoja, Roy Val, Tyra, so many different styles, so much different, disciplines in this division. There's definitely a lot of good ranked fighters. How many unranked monsters or killers? You've got Charles Johnson, Joshua Van, obviously they fought, Rafael Estevam, Andre Lima as well. They've got a couple of good names outside in the flyweight division. It's not jam-packed full of unranked prospects, but they've got a couple of good names, so I'll give them a 7 out of 10 when it comes to unranked monsters and killers. And have they got a stacked roster? You look at the flyweight division, I'm going to be honest, it's not really that stacked. It's only really where you get to like the top 7 onwards that it gets that stacked. There's a couple of good fighters that are unranked. The top 10 to top 15 range is kind of questionable, so I'll give them a 6 out of 10. Not the most stacked roster, which is kind of why it's seen as one of the worst divisions in the UFC, but there are some good fighters. So for flyweight, that brings the average to an 8 out of 10, which is still pretty high. Now, if we go through every single weight class, we've now arranged it in terms of categories. So right at the bottom, we've got the heavyweight division, which isn't a surprise. If it wasn't for guys like Aspinall, Garn, Volkov, it would be on its last leg, to be fair. So it's not a surprise that it's on the bottom of the list. They have got the most uncompetitive fighters in the UFC, followed by the light heavyweight division. Again, it's better than the heavyweight division. There's a couple of good fighters in it. Well, not a couple. There's a lot of good fighters in the light heavyweight division, but again, has a very similar problem where there is kind of just a lot of guys in there that are kind of canny, and they've not really got any big unranked fighters either. The featherweight, welterweight, and the bantamweight division make that the featherweight, welterweight, and the middleweight division make that middle spot where it's kind of like very, very talented, very, very good divisions, but the cream of the crop is the bantamweight division, the flyweight division, and the lightweight division. These are the toughest fights to get ranked in the UFC. These are the divisions where you've got to work your ass off even to make a ranking spot or even to get a shot at the rankings, and the divisions where it's nearly impossible to get ranked. So that is me ranking every UFC weight class by how hard it is to get ranked. Let me know your thoughts, and if you agree, thank you for watching.